This summer I went to what my wife calls my happy place, which is on the north shore of the St. Lawrence River, where I can refuel and replenish myself. Take a moment to think of your happy place. I think happiness is a good thing. I think most of us want to be happy. I think most of us want other people to be happy. Some people say that it's the only thing we want in and of itself. That we may want friendships or freedom or French fries, but we want those to be happy. Aristotle said it was the goal of human life. Robert Ingersoll, the great 19th century agnostic, said, "Happiness is the only good. The time to be happy is now. The place to be happy is here. And the way to be happy is to make others so." He wraps a sort of common sense around his own sense of self-worth and his commitment to be helpful for others. But there are times when I think about happiness and I think it's maybe too, not noble enough for me to aim as a goal in life. It's either too self-indulgent or too elusive, slips through our fingers. And while our consumerist culture offers us many glittering opportunities to buy things that are guaranteed to make you happy, I think a meaningful life requires more. The founder of ethical culture, Felix Adler, had just enough austere Calvinism in his upbringing to make him skeptical of happiness as well. He grew up in a Northern European culture and then over to the United States that was beginning to get seeped into a deep and brooding pessimism of Freudian world thinking. Freud thought that happiness was tied to actually adolescent wish fulfillment and seeing the ego as a puppet between a punishing superego and the drives of the id. It's a social pessimism that my mentor Joe Schumann taught me about. He said that happiness is universally desired, but it seems so seldom to be truly found. Sigmund Freud believed that happiness is built into the human condition, Joe wrote. He argued that we as biological creatures all have an instinct for unbridled aggression and sexual activity. But if we seek to live in civilized ways with others, we need to suppress those instincts, which leaves us a little frustrated, edgy, and uncomfortable. Freud wrote that the purpose of psychoanalysis was to relieve people of their neurotic unhappiness in order to restore them to the general unhappiness of humankind. So in Freud's framework, mental health is about exchanging a narrow, infantile unhappiness for a broader, more universal unhappiness, and maybe it serves a purpose. I don't really like that. I feel like he was right in some ways. Buddha was right. Suffering is everywhere. I get that. But I still think it's important to be happy. Now, unfortunately, when I was 2, Albert Camus proclaimed that happiness had gone out of style, so maybe I was born at the wrong time. He said, these are Camus' words, "Today, happiness is a crime. Never admit it. Don't say, 'I'm happy,' otherwise you'll hear condemnation of all around. So, you're happy, young man? What do you do with the orphans in Kashmir, or the New Zealand lepers who aren't happy as you say?" Camus says that made him feel, quote, as sad as toothpicks. I didn't know toothpicks could be sad. Are we afraid of admitting we're happy in a world that's so full of suffering? When we do, Camus says, we put ourselves in a self-imposed prison. So today I'm going to suggest that while we keep our eyes and our hearts open to the suffering of the world, we make room in our life for happiness. Now, my argument isn't really an argument, but it's broken into 3 sections. In the first section, I'm going to talk about how happiness seems out of reach for many people in the world, something taught to us by Viktor Frankl after his experience in a Nazi concentration camp. And then the second part, I'm going to talk about the comparison of happiness and meaning, or purpose. And then finally, I'm going to talk about some aspects of humanistic psychology and transcending our finite existence through relationships with others. Something that's particularly at the heart of ethical humanism. Got that? There are, by the way, notes on the table outside that give some of the points I'm making and references, because I throw a lot into my talks and probably too much. Now, as I said, for many people, circumstances make happiness elusive, if not impossible. Those who are experiencing war or significant health challenges, who don't have enough food or water to eat, for example, wouldn't necessarily say that happiness is their goal. In fact, it would seem a little weird to hear somebody in those situations say they were happy, right? But you can still lead, even in those circumstances, a purposeful life. And as I said, Viktor Frankl wrote about this. Now, many of you know, who knows about Viktor Frankl? Just raise your hand. Yeah, he's very widely read. Very briefly, in 1942, he was arrested by the Nazis, imprisoned in a concentration camp, and he knew that his wife and his children and his parents were also suffering the same fate, but didn't know that he would be the only one to survive. As prisoner 119104, he knew that there was little he could do about his situation. Nazi guards held complete power and would humiliate prisoners every opportunity they would take. And in those brutal conditions, happiness was unattainable. But he learned that, quote, when we are no longer able to change our situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. So while the circumstances were grim, he found purpose by adjusting his attitude. When happiness is out of reach, he sought purpose and meaning. A big part of that was simply surviving. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, which he wrote in 1946, he talked about how when prisoners focused on their external situation, on their very dire circumstances and suffering, they quite often would not be able to survive. But when those discovered meaning in what he called a repugnant situation, he described them as buoyant, able to stay afloat, less likely to drown under the weight of their suffering. Now, purpose and meaning were found in seeing their situation as a challenge to overcome. And he concluded that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, the choice to choose one's attitude in any given circumstance, to choose one's own way. I admit, from my comfortable chair and my comfortable life when I was writing this, I may not be the best candidate to tell people who are suffering deeply to search for meaning and purpose and not happiness, right? The intellectual solution that Frankl offers may not be so effective when your stomach is empty and your pain is deep. But Frankl was remarkably effective at keeping his own psyche alive and at helping many clients that he served in his suicide prevention work after the war. His approach was wrapped up in what he called logotherapy. And the basic idea of logotherapy is pretty simple. It's to look at your life as a whole. Imagine, he said, that you have lived your life out till the very end with all its ups and downs, and then you're dead. And now imagine you could live that life over with all the same up and down, not controlling, not changing the circumstances, except you could change your attitude. That was the concept of logotherapy, to grab a hold of that. And in choosing your attitude, you can develop purpose, you can develop wisdom, you can develop meaning. Now, there are parallel thoughts in Felix Adler's writing. Adler urges people to see their life in their eternity. In all of it, actually, he talked about seeing it from Spinoza's perspective, the perspective of the eternal. And from that perspective, we can write our own unique story, maintaining our dignity and living a meaningful life. So, my second section, dignity, purpose, meaning. What are they and how do they differ from happiness? And I explored these a couple of decades ago when I taught high school philosophy, and I'd asked my students, would you prefer to live a happy life that was meaningless or an unhappy life that was meaningful? Most ended up choosing the meaningful life. They agreed with the utilitarian John Stuart Mill, that it's, quote, better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Most people don't want to live like well-fed livestock. Or at least they don't want to admit they choose to be a satisfied pig. But that's kind of a bad choice, because I want to be happy and have a meaningful life. Albert Maslow actually said that you really had to have the basic needs like food and shelter and security in order to build meaning or achieve self-actualization. So that you had to have the basics before you could be happy. But Frankl challenges us with a more heroic interpretation of human nature, one in which human beings can rise above their horrible conditions, create a life of meaning and integrity. And it appeals to the philosophically romantic side of me, I guess, to see human beings as greater than their circumstances. Maybe it's why I'm a humanist. I drew some of this out of the work of C.G. Jung, the psychoanalyst. And while I reject some of his supernatural and mystical elements, he did have great faith in the human imagination to overcome one's circumstance. And the way he believed you could do that was the ability to create narratives in your life which you take the good and the bad in your life and you make a whole out of it, and you own it. Jung said that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a part of one's being, but by the integration of contraries. So owning the good and the bad is something you can do when you see your life as your narrative to write. Camus often wrote about characters that were full of lives of despair and joy, and said that often we can't choose that. But it doesn't mean you have to stop trying to be happy. So, is happiness the goal of life? Or is meaning the goal of life? Now, people are unique and diverse, and that's a good thing. It's what we celebrate at the Ethical Society, the inherent uniqueness of every individual. Ethical humanists agree with Viktor Frankl that everyone is unique and everybody has their own story to tell. And that's why in my pastoral work, I don't offer a single overarching value or a solitary ultimate concern as the answer to life's questions. I generally offer a smorgasbord of various values that you need to pick and choose from, like meaning or self-worth or wholeness or healthy interpersonal relationships, belonging, autonomy, agency. And I try to honor those in my life, sometimes honoring some more than others. There's no formula for living a happy life. There's no single goal. So the question I pose has a problem with it, because it assumes that there is a single goal of life. There's no single goal. There are many goals. But that doesn't mean we still can't all want to be happy. It's not easy because of a very well-studied paradox. I had a conversation with a gentleman earlier this morning about it, and it was the first thing he talked about. He tried to answer the question. He said, well, if you try to be happy, you sometimes can't be. Happiness is elusive. I mean, when you go out to a party and you're absolutely intent on having a good time, it's usually the hardest night to have a good time. So it's hard to be something. You know this intuitively. You can't really buy happiness off the shelf whenever you want it. It usually arises indirectly. And in all the things that I read for today, there were different words for it. Joe Schumann said that happiness is something that accrues in our life, or it's more of a byproduct. Felix Adler said that happiness may come as an accessory. We never dare make it an end. Frankl said not to, quote, aim at success. He said, the more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue. So that's part of the elusive quality of happiness. And it's made more complex because we're all so different for each of us, what makes us happy and how we get it. So we tend to rely on subjective experience. I mean, when you're asked, are you happy? Usually you stop and you sort of think of your subjective state and then answer. But Aristotle was a philosopher who said, it's not so much the state of consciousness. And that becomes clear when you study the translation. In any intro to Aristotle course you take, they'll talk about how the word translated for meaning, for happiness, the word translated was eudaimonia, which is the Greek word that doesn't so much mean happiness as it means flourishing. Flourishing. More of a process than an end state. More of a journey than a destination, right? And second, flourishing might be more objectively observable than subjective experiences or emotions. Because it's about something that occurs from changing from who you are to what you can be, from activating your potential, so that an acorn flourishes when it becomes an oak, or a violinist becomes a violinist when they play beautiful music. It's a process. We transcend our limitations and become more. And that's a part of the humanist psychology that I want to talk about in this last section, and the importance of relationships. Now, humanistic psychology is a vibrant alternative to the brooding Freudian perspectives, and it shares a lot of ethical culture as well. Both assume that human beings are basically good with potential to grow and live a flourishing, productive life. And many thinkers like Abraham Maslow or Carl Rogers said that humanist psychology likes to use the term wellness instead of happiness. And wellness is more like flourishing. It's linked to how well people develop their potential. Rogers said, the good life is a process, not a state of being. So humanist psychology also assumes that we have a certain level of free will to a degree, without getting too much into the metaphysics, that behavior is not solely determined by hunger or thirst or instinctual drives. It's not merely determined as a reaction to external stimulus. But instead, human beings, while greatly affected by factors outside their control, choose to discover and develop their potential. And that can make us happy. Joe Schumann said that happiness is manifested and felt in overcoming obstacles, successfully advancing and moving ahead. Happiness is an active process, not a passive outcome. It's not the end we seek, but rather the experiential accompaniment of a character that is dedicated to achieving goals which we value and further expand our possibilities and horizons. So in ethical culture, our possibilities and horizons are often about human relationships. It offers us a form of psychological transcendence, not a metaphysical transcendence, but a way to get beyond our own ego, beyond our place in the universe, and beyond our time in existence. It's part of the authentic happiness model many of you know of. Martin Seligman at Penn developed this, a leading positive psychology advocate. And oversimplifying a bit, Seligman said that in order to flourish, it's best to serve something greater than yourself. Seligman said that the meaningful life is best created by using your highest strengths and talents to belong to and serve something you believe is larger than the self. It can involve posterity, living for something that will outlast you. If you dedicate yourself, for example, to an academic study or an institution or to your family or to friends, you know that the fruits of your labor are not all going to be harvested while you are alive. Bertrand Russell said that the value of a person's life is to be measured by the commitments to something that outlasts him. So through selfless work, we transcend the present moment. To conclude, I'm going to focus on transcendence of the ego in the here and now, something that's a challenge for all of us. We call ethical humanism often a religion of relationships. We all know that a life worth living well is a life worth living well with other people. How we tie ethics and happiness together is important. Schumann says that the pursuit of happiness and morality overlap. If happiness emerges from a life actively led, from a life of engagement, then humanism says that a major source of happiness emerges from the engagement with other human beings. We may all have our private source of happiness, he writes, be it from writing, hiking in the woods, to reading, to collecting coins, to woodworking. But beyond these sources of happiness, humanism commends that those activities that augment the self through a commitment to a broader happiness of all other people, and then beyond the general welfare and happiness and community, and ultimately to all humankind. Now that's saying a lot. You know, who am I to think that I can augment the good of humankind? But an equally good question is, who am I to think I cannot? If humanism, if ethical culture believes in the worth of every individual, we have to start with ourselves and take our lives seriously. We have to try to be heroic in our narrative. I know that I'm not always heroic. We can often be fools more easily, right? We all have feet of clay. But I can be good to those people that I meet every day. I can be good to those people that I know. I can be good to those people that I'm never going to meet by being active in advocating for humane social policy and foreign aid programs. And I can strive to help those living 7 generations from now, should our species be able to survive that long. A real question. Personally, I know I flourish best when I bring out the best in others. We need space and time, like the song said, for ourselves. That's a part of it too. We need a happy place to renew and refuel ourselves. But I don't think we can flourish or be happy if we don't, for a substantial portion of our life, dedicate ourselves to bringing out the best in others, to caring for those in need. And in doing so, we may be lucky enough to live a life that we would describe as happy. So while I don't agree with Robert Ingersoll that the only goal of life is happiness, I do agree that the time to be happy is now, the place to be happy is here, and the way to be happy is to make others so. Thank you very much.